I was going to say long time no see.
Long time no see. How are you?
How's it been?
Yeah, it's been good. It's been good.
I see some of your videos, the thumbnails, but I forget to watch them.
Don't hold you to
Maybe eventually.
Yeah. Maybe eventually. Yeah. Well, yeah. There's some interesting thoughts that I'm sort of having in this.
Okay. Yeah. So, have you changed your mind on anything, or got any views?
I kind of see that. It seems unrealistic in any sense to think that Muhammad wasn't affirming the Torah as a valid form of scripture, at least in terms of commandments or judgments.
What do you mean?
Because there's a particular verse, Surah Al-Ma'idah, Surah 5, Ayah 43, where Muhammad says, why, this is Allah saying, why do they come to you, O Muhammad, when, for judgments when they have the Torah? Well, the issue is the way they would have understood that from a Jewish perspective is from the 613 mitzvah, the rules. If you look at what those are, and these were before the time of Muhammad, you're going to get problems. If he's saying like, I can't judge for you because you have the Torah, the judgments are in the Torah, 613 judgments in the Torah, we can go through them all, and there are problems. There are some serious problems, like from my perspective. Hey, how you doing, sir? How you doing? Good, let's speak.
So what would be the problem?
Because if Muhammad is affirming it, you can also derive doctrine from some of these. Because 613 is a lot. It's all of the books of the Torah.
I know most of it to do with agricultural. Like most of the laws have to do with like farming and agriculture. Some of it's to do with women.
Well, there are,
purity
but
laws and this kind of stuff.
well, it's still applying to the Jewish people even today. Although there are arguments about how you should interpret that. In fact, to be honest with you, there are arguments for whether or not it's 613. The only reason they say 613. Yeah, basically because first of all, how you even count them? Right? Do you count the same ones if they're duplicates? What happens if you have a single verse that has multiple ones? Do you count that as separate? Maimonides had his interpretation. Another rabbis have theirs. But in terms of how the Jews at the time would have understood it, what Muhammad would have said is, yeah, you have your Torah that has the judgments. Why are you coming to me for the judgments? So those 613 or some approximation of that are affirmed. And those verses also include verses about God being a father.
Oh, okay. Interesting, yeah.
So, I don't know.
You can have abrogation in the Old Testament as well.
Yeah, I mean, they have that as a thing. To be honest with you though, abrogation from my perspective, abrogation to me is just an admission that something has changed. I mean, in a sense, I find, the very term and the way it's defined, I'm actually comfortable with because I think it is just, that's what I think.
By the mere fact you have the New Testament implies that there's been
There's a verse in the Quran.
Testament.
I think it's Surah 30, Ayah 50, I think. I might have to check that. But it's where Isa is commanded to tell the Jews some things that are haram are made halal now, and some things are halal are made haram. The Quran never tells you what that is. Hey, good to see you, man. Hey, long time no speak.
Yeah.
So, because it doesn't tell you exactly what the...
Chapter 3, verse 50 something.
Oh, yeah, that's probably right.
40 something. But anyway, I know what you're referring to.
So the question then is, well, what is that?
Yeah, good point.
Because it's never explained. There are some traditional understandings, but the traditional understandings are things like judgments, actually. It's legal judgments. It's things like whether it's permissible to drink alcohol, or things about food laws, dietary laws. Because the Muslim dietary laws are different from the Jewish ones, right? So from a Muslim perspective, I guess it'll be fine if Isa came and changed dietary laws. Well, I mean, from what I remember reading, that's an example of how they see it.
It could be possibly interpretation of the Sabbath, like Sabbath observance.
Yeah, they do also that as well.
So maybe Jesus made things easy for them when it comes to observing the Sabbath. Yeah, and also from what I understand, some of the commandments were given to the Israelites due to the hardness of their hearts, so like as a punishment. So maybe Jesus came to relax some of those laws, and this was part of the good news.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because from an Islamic tradition, to be honest with you, it looks like they largely get this from asking Christians and be like, what did Jesus say? I mean, you kind of would have to. I mean, the Quran itself actually gives testimony to this as a valid approach.
If you do not know, ask those who know.
Yes, it's like if you, because apparently the Arabs were saying, hang on a sec, it does not befit Allah to send human prophets. If Allah were to send a prophet, he would send only angels. And the Quran rebukes this. Yeah, it's in the Quran. And the Quran rebukes this by saying, if you're in doubt about this, ask those the people in the book before you, because they know it was human prophets. Check that out.
I think I know what you're referring to,
Yeah. But apparently the way the Arabs would argue is they would say, Allah would only send angels.
Another way to understand that verse, it can also include female prophets as well. Because the word that's used, I believe, is rijal. And rijal is commonly like translated as men. But it can also be linguistically interpreted as that which is up walks, like on two legs.
Sure. I mean, I'm going based off of like Tafsir Ibn Kathir, which is just like the first Tafsir I was
based upon
reading.
in the Bible, you do have female prophets. I think some scholars use this as an argument to say that prophethood can also include females as well, female prophets as well. And not
Yes, we would agree with that. So, for example, I assume you hold the traditional view that Mary is not a prophet. Miriam in the Quran is not a prophet.
I'm open to that, because some scholars are of that view as well. I mean, Deborah, I think she's a prophet in the Bible.
So we have ours. But yeah, I always want, because I did hear there were some arguments in Islam about whether or not Miriam can be considered a prophetess, because
Ibn Kathir, in his book Stories of the Prophet, he makes mention that there's some scholars that hold the view, and the virgin birth was the miracle that was given to Mary.
that makes sense. What do you think about Al-Qadr in terms of
Predestination.
Yes.
I don't have proper knowledge, but you can ask me if you want.
All right. Well, I appreciate your honesty in your attempt to answer.
It's a complex.
My voice is dying. So, do you hold to some sort of that Allah predetermines all things are known, like Allah has foreknowledge, right? He knows all things, which I think we both agree. Both in our tradition as well, we have that. But Allah has determined the outcome of all things. It's written in, how do you pronounce it? Layth al-Mahfuz?
Lohi Mahfuz.
The
preserved tablet.
So if everything is written there, including I think the Quran and the Injil and the Torah and the Zabur, so is there any way that you can go outside of that? Can you do otherwise?
Yeah, I tend to follow, have you heard of Arminian on free will?
Yes.
So I think that's also the mainstream Muslim view as well. So I believe in free will, but also I believe God knows everything.
Right. Well, I'm a modernist, so I hold the modernist view. Well, Arminianism I think is fine as well. My understanding is that the Sunni view is actually simply that it's a bit sort of like Bila Kaif without saying how. So it's like, yes, we affirm that Allah knows all things and determines all things. Yes, you have to do that, but there is some sense in which you're still free, and that you still have accountability, and that you're still. And they will simply say, we don't know how that works. Because I was looking at scholars. Hamza Yusuf, I looked at him. He seems to sort of be in that kind of way. There were some scholars that weren't. Well, scholars. Zakir Naik, I don't really consider him a scholar. He isn't. He kind of thinks that it's not real sort of hard predestination, but like he gives this weird analogy about a school, a teacher and some students, and the teacher kind of knowing what the kids are going to do. I don't know.
Like an exam.
Yeah. But it doesn't sound like it's the same.
Mock exam.
Yeah. So he kind of already knows, but not.
There is this open theist view as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I reject open theism. I think open theism is to deny the actual attributes of God. So, from a Christian perspective, I would deny that. I would deny the Calvinistic perspective as well, because that's basically the Christian understanding of hard determinism.
Yeah.
We don't say that.
Are you reform? I thought you were Reformed Christian.
Me?
Yeah.
No, I'm not Reformed. I'm ecumenical. So for me, I'm happy in the Catholic tradition of Molinism. So as Molinists, we would say that God has foreknowledge of all things that will be and things that would have been otherwise if you chose differently. And based off that, he arranges all things in that situation. But you still have free will.
What does the Catholic Church teach about predestination? Are they like modalists or Arminians?
So Molinist comes from a Catholic priest, basically.
Named after a priest?
Yeah, it's named after a Catholic priest. So the Catholics would affirm free will. They would affirm that there are things that are predestined, as would pretty much all Christians. So for example, God in his foreknowledge knew that man would ultimately sin, fall short of the glory of God, and that he would choose to send a saviour to take on the atonement of all mankind, both their present, past and future sins. So knowing that knowledge and choosing to act in a state where there is no creation, there is no time, in effect is predetermining things. Do you sort of see what I mean? So the fact that there was no situation in which Jesus would not have been sent.
Is it like ongoing or continuous? God's actions are ongoing.
So since God is sans creation, he's outside of creation and outside of time, all his choices to act in the world are already known. Right?
By God.
Yeah, and through his foreknowledge and his power, he knows what man will freely do, and he knows what his answer is to it. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Like Augustine talks about that, for example. Augustine talks about how there are things of which...
I think I would probably be kind to Augustine's view on free will. I think it would be very similar to the Sunni position.
My understanding is the Sunni position is there is no free will, like not in a way that can be defended. It's just simply that Allah has predetermined all things, but you do in some sense have some freedom. But they can't describe what that is because it isn't freedom as traditionally understood by the classical perspective. So if you look at the classical understanding of freedom, it's defined as the ability to have done otherwise, right? So like when I choose to drink Coke, to do that freely, I must have been able to have chosen not to drink Coke or to have chosen Pepsi. But if Allah determines all events, then necessarily speaking, I have to have chosen Coke, if that's what he had chosen. And that seems to be the proper understanding of Adam.
That seems to be quite a reformist, a Calvinistic view.
That is the Calvinist largely. I'm not a Calvinist. Calvinism is a subsect of the Protestant branch.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's not really that main, not that big. I mean, there are Calvinists, but not many.
I mean, my view is that God's omniscient, he knows everything.
Yeah.
All actions or abilities take place by God, like God giving you that ability to perform that act. But the free will is that you have a choice of how to use that ability.
Okay, so can I ask you, in the Quran it says that God creates you and what you do, and what you make. Now, so for example, Ibn Kathir's tafsir on this, he seems to be of the view that, it means that not only are you and me and him and everyone here created by God, but also our actions. God creates them. My understanding, at least from the Athari position, is that yes, Allah does create everyone's actions. And my understanding is this is called Occasionalism. Have you heard of the philosophy of Occasionalism? Give it a check when you get home. My understanding is that in terms of Kalam philosophy, Muslims, at least through the medieval period, understood that God creates all causes and actions. So for example, if I got a match, and you know how you strike a match against the rough side and it turns into flame, well, occasionalists would say it's not that the match has sulfur, which in and of its nature is flammable, and if you hit a rough surface, the friction causes it to alight. They wouldn't say that. They'd say, no, it's just that Allah wills the match to set aflame at the exact moment when you strike it, and the fact that it happens to be when you strike it is coincidence. It's that Allah is the one who generates that action.
I mean, I would interpret that to mean that God permits things in the world, but it doesn't mean that he approves of all things. So he may allow evil to some extent, but it doesn't mean that he approves of it.
Well, from my understanding, everything that comes is from him. So, I mean, I don't want to be crude about it, because obviously you're very respectful and I don't want to be pointing things, but everything good must come from Allah, but also everything bad must come from Allah, in a very direct sense.
I mean, there's something similar in Isaiah, though, in the book of Isaiah. I think it's Isaiah chapter 45, where God says, I create good and evil, and who comes from me.
So it depends on the translation, because the translations that you read, there are some that I think more accurately, translate that word, and the more accurate translation is destruction or calamity, rather than evil. So I would go with that translation.
Be that the case, I still understand that God allows or permits evil, and people cannot perform any action without the ability given to them, and that ability comes from God. But God's given us a choice, like He's given us the free will.
So your actions you generate.
So we have free will how to use that ability. So we have a choice of how to use the ability, whether to use it for good or for bad.
So when you use your free choice and you come up with an act, an event, a cause, you're the one that generates that. Like, you're the one that originates it. Because, for example, say me and this guy are having a chat, and we want to decide what we're going to have to eat. And I say, I want a chicken dinner. And he says, no, I want chicken nuggets. Ultimately, only one of us can win out on that, right? The only other alternative is that we always agree. You know, whenever I say I want a chicken dinner, it's like, yeah, chicken dinner. And when I say chicken nuggets, it's like, yeah, chicken nuggets. But my understanding really is, if Allah predetermines all things, then there has to be a way in which my will and his will merge. Because otherwise, he has to have presence. Otherwise, he's not really determining anything. You know what I mean?
Determine could be understood in terms of God chooses the gender of a person. He chooses like what eye color, the race or ethnicity. So that we don't have a choice, but that's determined.
I agree, but I'm talking about free will as just classically understood about the things that we do have power over. So like, if I got a little hammer and I hit your knee, your knee's going to move, right? You didn't choose for your knee to move, but it's a response of the body. That's determined. That's not something you have free choice over. But from a libertarian free will perspective, there are things I believe, and Christians generally, apart from Calvinists, believe that you have free will over. You can choose. So I could choose to do good and love and to serve my neighbour, to give charity, to go to church, to partake in the liturgy. And there's the bad that I could also choose to do, go and hurt someone or whatever that might be. But we believe that God, in his nature, because we would say God has a nature, in his nature is good. It is nothing bad. So another way of looking at this, what I find confusing is, does Allah have a nature? Is Allah good, or is it just that whatever Allah wills is the good?
So Quran refers to Allah as being Al-Muqsim, the source of goodness, or the one who is good. So it's one of the God's names and attributes.
Okay.
But in terms of like permitting evil, God, like in the Quran, there is free will in that for belief and disbelief. So
yeah, I definitely agree that the Quran implies free will, because there are many things in the Quran that seem to say you have a choice. If you choose this, you will be rewarded. If you choose this, you will be punished. I think that's all over the Quran. My issue is that having looked at some Muslims who do hold to a strong view of Al-Qadr, they think it is pure predestination. They say, no, even in the Quran. Like, there's a verse in the Quran, I think it's in Surah An-Najm, 53 maybe. It says something like, there is nothing that will come over you, no calamity that will come over the believers that Allah has not permitted.
But that's not something you're responsible for. So like natural disasters like hurricanes or earthquakes, that's not within your control.
Well, I think the tafsir that is generally looked at is the idea that you can't do anything. This is supported in Hadith. You can't do anything to change like the outcome of like good things or bad things. So there's a Hadith where I think it's Abu Huraira. He's saying, Prophet, I struggle, or I am worried that I may commit adultery, should I castrate myself to ensure that I don't? And Muhammad says, look, what is written is written. The ink on the pen is dry. What is written for you to do, you will do. So it doesn't matter if you get circumcised or not.
Yeah, so that wouldn't make sense in terms of the Day of Judgment, which the Quran speaks about. And the purpose of Day of Judgment is people are basically rewarded or punished for their actions in this life. Whereas if a person didn't have free will or free choice, then they wouldn't be able to be judged because they're just simply, carrying out what they've been programmed or predestined to.
I definitely agree
And
that
with the Hadith, we do have sectarian Hadith as well. So not to say the words like Muslims, you had the kind of
sorry, I'm listening. I'm just trying to find a hadith for you. Just because there's something.
So you have different groups using different hadiths to support their school of thought.
Right. Well, you ultimately have to believe in Qadar, right? Because those who deny Qadar are like the Qadariya.
It's to do with your definition of how you define Qadar.
It seems to me the early Muslim understanding is that, Allah predetermines all things.
So the earliest understanding would be from the Quran itself, because the Quran is a collection of what the Prophet preached. So from the Quran it says, whoever wants to believe, let them believe, and whoever wants to disbelieve, let them disbelieve. So for example, in Surah 18, verse number 27, so people have a choice whether they want to believe in the Quran or not, or disbelieve in the Quran, or be Muslim or
I do absolutely agree that there are definitely many verses in the Quran that imply free will. I think that's absolutely clear. There are verses in the Quran that seem to imply otherwise, but
that would be the earliest Muslim view.
Right.
The Quran itself would be the earliest Muslim doctrine.
I definitely agree with that as a principle. Again, the Quran seems to have a mixture of both. I think there's definitely more verses that imply free will, but it's difficult. But I wanted to show you this. This is the sort of thing that leads me to think that there has to be a strong form of predestination. This is Sahih Muslim 2.6. What does that say?
Yes.
2657. Verily Allah has fixed a very portion of adultery which a man will indulge in, and which he out of necessity must commit. The adultery of the eye is the lustful look, the adultery of the tongue is a licentious speech, the heart desires and yearns which the parts may or may not put into effect. Does that not sound like determined?
I would say it's problematic from the point of view of the Quran, because in the Quran it makes punishment of adultery, and it wouldn't make sense you can punish people for adultery.
Absolutely.
They're just simply.
But you see, this is where me and you would differ, because I would look at that and say, kind of sounds like there's a contradiction with the Hadith of the Quran. But I guess your view. What would your view be?
So the earliest view seems to be like Abu Hanifa, the Hanafi school.
Yeah.
So his view is if the Hadith clashes with the Quran, then he would reject it because the Quran is mutawatir, meaning
right. And a lot of the Hadith are just ahad, like
singular. Yeah.
So would you say that some Hadith in the 6 books of Hadith are possibly wrong if they go against the Quran? Would you say?
Everyone says that, yeah.
Well, I've met others that don't.
So you said 6.
Yeah. Sahih Muslim, Sahih Bukhari.
So even the Salafis accept that. With Bukhari and some or even with Muslim as well, they regard them as being pure.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the other collections like Ibn Majah or Abu Dawood and Nasai, so even the Salafis would accept that they may contain hadiths that are wrong.
Oh, absolutely. That's because they actually grade the other ones, right? So Sahih Bukhari is all Sahih, like by his standards. Same with Muslim. But Al-Tirmidhi, that's just his book. So he grades them, right? Well, him and maybe others, like Al-Albani in the modern period, will say this is Sahih, this is Da'if, this is Hassan, this is... So
they're determined by the chain of narration from the Salafis. For the Maliki school and also for the Hanafi school, they're judged also by the text, like textual criticism. So based upon like the narration itself doesn't have any hidden error or hidden defect. So like it agrees with the established principles of like in Medina, the city of Medina or the city of Mecca, and also they agree with the Quran, and also they're not irrational or nonsensical. So So for example, the Hadith doesn't say like Jesus is the biological son of God, even if the chain is correct, but the content is teaching something that contradicts directly the Quran, then in the Hanafi school it would be rejected, and also in the Maliki school as well. I don't know too much about the other schools, so I can't speak for them.
Can you remind me of? Thank you for telling me this. Can you remind me what your school is? Where you stand on? You know, do you hold to a particular school of jurisprudence?
I'm attracted towards the Hanafi school.
Hanafi. Would you consider yourself Ash'ari
Yeah,
in terms of Aqidah?
Yeah, Ash'ari, Maturidi. Yeah.
But you're definitely not Salafi. No. All right. Well, thank you very much for this chat. I really appreciate it. Thank you for being honest and nice calm chat. God bless.